All right. I think we're going to go ahead and get started now. First of all, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay, or if it's strange sound. Good. All right. Excellent. So this is the first of a 5-week kind of run into the divinatory arts, and each of the five weeks we'll be discussing a different aspect of it. This afternoon or evening or morning, depending on where you're coming from, is going to be discussing the clairvoyant nature. But before I do that, I want to sort of preface this with the reason why we do what we do, or the reason why I do what I do. Maybe I was using the royal we there. We are pleased. The idea is really to be able to return oneself to oneself. You know, we live in a culture that has so many different distractions, so many different paths that you can take, so many different things that can occupy, right, your life. It makes it very difficult to, in the face of all that, to live a natural life the way that one might be intended. Now, there's all sorts of words that get bantered around in the so-called divinatory or psychic or whatever, you know, type of community. And there's a lot of ambiguity between what is clairvoyant, right? What is psychic, what is mediumistic, what is empathic, what's sensitive, and so on and so forth. And so part of what we're going to be discussing too is to give you a framework or a reference, so that you can begin to detect what is being used at different times, right? But these are all very natural abilities for the human. And they are based in the 5 centers. And I'm actually going to switch cameras here for a moment so that you can see this better. All right. Are you guys seeing this now? Good. Okay. So the human, first of all, is shaped like a pentagram, right? In this sort of way here. My camera's trying to disobey me over there, so pardon me. I can't do that much. And these 5 natures that I talked about, the clairvoyant, the empathic, the sensitive, the medium, and the psychic, or psyche, we'll get to the reason why there's that one split, are each tied into one particular center. So the center that we're discussing today is going to be particularly around the moving center, but the other ones, what do I mean by center? I better back this up actually, right? The idea of a center is a functional part of the human. If you consider yourself carefully and the various aspects of your expressions or your behaviors, you'll find that there are certain functions that kind of get grouped together. So for instance, thinking functions are not necessarily equated to the emotional functions, although they can impact one another. You've got moving functions, right? Learning to catch a ball or whatever the case may be, that is not a thinking process. And thank goodness it's not, because if it were a thinking process and you had to think about catching a ball, you would probably end up getting smacked in the head with it, right? Instinctive processes are neither emotional nor physical in the same way. You don't have to continue to tell your heart to beat over and over and over again, right? It just kind of does that on its own. You don't have to tell yourself to be hungry or to be tired. Those sorts of things just happen. And so this is that grouping. And what we're talking about is the moving aspects of oneself. This is everything that involves a movement that you had to learn at some point in time. So things as simple as walking, as in some cases talking, catching a ball, the example that I gave earlier, driving a car, riding a bike, anything that you had to learn to be able to do, and involves an expression of movement or a repetitional life, a repetitional pattern is involved in the moving center, okay? The emotional center, I think this one's fairly obvious, but it is not sensation, but feelings, the emotional type of context or content in things. We'll get into the actual power of what the emotions can do at a later point. The thinking center These are your thoughts. These are also having to do with how you reason things out, how you approach things, how you investigate, how you learn about things, and how you gather kind of facts and details into yourself. The instinctive, of course, is things like respiration, heartbeat, those sorts of things. And then the sexual aspect is divided into two, primarily from the standpoint that at the higher end of the bar, it is the creative aspect of oneself. At the lower end of the bar, it's the procreative aspect. So it's not to say good and evil as far as higher and lower. It's just how the energy is used. Yeah. Okay. So this is the framework that we're going to be talking about within this context. And again, the clairvoyant aspect goes with the moving center. All right. Another aspect that needs to be discussed, because it's going to play a lot of relevance, especially in this, is what's called the tuning fork principle. And Sachin, I know you've heard this before, the tuning fork. You could probably give the lesson, right, on the tuning fork principle. Torsten, I'm sure you could as well. But the idea is, and this is the diagram here. Can you guys see this okay? Is it coming through clear enough up here? Good, okay. The idea in this is that if I have a tuning fork tuned to a certain frequency like A or C or whatever the case may be, and I have a second one tuned also to that same frequency, and hand it to somebody else and then strike mine, now of course mine is going to ring, but also the other one, even though it's physically disconnected, will also begin to ring in sympathy. And this ties into, the reason why this ties in is because as you'll see in a moment, the printing that happens with the moving center creates tuning forks in the blood system, primarily actually in the arterial blood system. Let's talk about the blood for a little bit. There's so much in history having to do with blood, isn't there? Where I'm going to switch cameras. Did that switch? No. Technology. All right, there it goes. That way I can see you all. Can you see me? Is it still following? Okay, yeah. All right, good. There's so much to do with blood in history. The idea that I want to get across is that aside from being this kind of fluid that transports oxygen, that transports nutrients, or that transports antibiotics, things like that into the system, it also actually has a storage capacity within it. We know that the reason why the blood is actually red is because of the iron content, and iron has this property of being magnetic, doesn't it? Right? You can, if you, as a kid, one of my favorite things to do was to take a magnet out into the backyard and just kind of rub it through the dirt, right? And you get this sort of dark hair that begins to grow. These are all the iron filings in the dirt, and of course, they're magnetically sensitive. Now, we are completely filled with this. And so in some respects, we're sort of like a living embodiment of this magnetization. Now, that's the physical side of things, but sort of like an old tape recorder, or you know, a VHS, if we can remember that far back. The idea is that through certain actions, through certain mechanisms, it's actually possible to imprint those things in oneself. And so I gave the example earlier of being able to catch a ball, right, when it's thrown at you. This print, because of practice, of repetition, ends up becoming imprinted in the blood and stored in there. And so this stores so much with us. It stores our history, all of our content, everything that we've both intentionally and in some cases unintentionally put there. And the recording mechanism that actually prints the blood is the moving center, right? Located basically here, roughly in the stomach. As the blood passes through those wandering nerves in the stomach, then whatever it is that it's kind of trying to pick up the habit of puts that signal out in there. Now, this raises a lot of interesting things about history, doesn't it? Like the idea of blood brothers, right? They would cut their hands and kind of make that bond with one another. What that was doing was sharing that electromagnetic imprint between the two of them. And the reason for that is so that they could be clairvoyant with one another. across, I won't say across time. I'll actually say across space, across vast distances, not across time though. Who can give me another example of, if you can think of one, of blood as it shows up in history? While I get my camera to follow me again. Anything? I can't hear you, Mark and Serena.
I've gone completely blank. No, I can't. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, no problem, no problem. Pleiades, can you think of one? No, okay. Everyone's in the zone, right? Okay, that's fine. What about, yeah?
Little while back,
Can you scoot closer to the microphone? I can't quite hear you.
we went to a old castle, and where a lot of a battle had taken place, and a lot of people had been killed. But in the air, you could taste blood.
Oh yeah.
And
right.
Yeah, it was really unusual. But you could, and it wasn't just myself, but there was quite a few of us. As you walked through the castle, you could taste blood in your mouth.
Yes, right. That sort of metallic taste, right? Yeah. Yeah, the tongue is interesting because it is a very sensitive part of the body, not just physically, right? Not just to taste or touch, but it's also electrically sensitive. It can pick up on various things because that's actually kind of its job, isn't it? It's rod shaped, and so it flavors whatever it is that you're saying, but also in the mouth, right? It's got that sort of cup shape. So got both those aspects. Yeah, very good. What about the Last Supper? Why didn't anyone mention that one? Yeah. The idea in the Last Supper was, because the wine nowadays is symbolic of the blood of Christ, and the wafers are symbolic of the flesh. But the idea actually dates back to a very ancient ritual of consuming blood, and the consuming of blood creates that astral connection. Now, as the story goes, the more in the Gnostic literature and that sort of stuff, what the apostles consumed on that night was actually literally Jesus' blood. That was the early belief in the early days of Christianity. And the idea, of course, being that if they did that and introduced that frequency into their systems, they would have this resonance, right? This blood brotherhood or type of connection with Jesus. Now, this ties into tuning fork principle, because whatever you print in your blood, we talked about this earlier, you can then summon a resonance with. So I'll give you a really classic example of what clairvoyance is before we work into it really deeply here. I'm quite an accomplished martial artist. I've been doing it for 45-ish years. And when I think back to the process of learning something like martial arts, this really, really ties in. At first, it's mental, because my instructor said, this is how you stand, this is how you block, this is how you kick, this is how you punch, so on and so forth, right? This is how you deflect, and everything starts off very mentally based. But then through, I almost said thousands, but it was probably, in the tens or hundreds of thousands of repetitions with these various things, fists and kicks and everything else being thrown at me, it ended up becoming printed in through my moving center into my blood, right? And we have an interesting expression, don't we, in society? I don't know if it's the same in the UK or Germany, but here in America, when someone follows a particular course that their family had followed, they say, it's in his blood, right? He was meant to be a soldier, it's in his blood. He was meant to be a mechanic, it's in his blood. Yeah, you guys have that too. But for me, I intentionally put martial arts, put self-defense, I should say, in my blood. And at some point in time, something very, very interesting happened. And of course, I wasn't aware enough at the point to be able to add this up. Now I am. But when I would end up sparring somebody, I could see in my mind immediately what it was that they were going to do. sometimes half a second, sometimes seconds before they did it. And it was that vibe, if you will, that I was picking up on. That is one of the most vivid examples of clairvoyance, because it's that resonance. I planted it there by repetition, and I have the blood print of sparring or of martial arts, that sort of thing, in my blood. And it creates that tuning fork kind of resonant connection. Now, where else do we see this? I think almost everybody has had experiences with clairvoyance from the standpoint of family, because your blood relatives, you actually share a certain type of genetic print with them. You share a certain type of blood print with them. And what I mean by blood print is really having to do with like your heritage, right? It's very, very common for a mother or a father or even a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, when they are, actually it can be separated by time and distance, but when someone in their family is upset or injured or in harm's way, that they feel it. They feel it. Now, they don't feel it in a vision. Usually it can happen that way, but usually it's just this sense of, oh my God, I've got to call so and so, right? I've got to find out what's going on. Yeah. That is a clairvoyant aspect, and that happens naturally. This is one of the divinatory aspects that accompanies all humans in this regard. It happens, right? Who here has had a experience like that? Yeah, Torsten, do you mind sharing it?
Yeah, with the family, and also I think it's not just the family. It can also be with the ancestral line, I would say.
Absolutely.
Like the grandfather and so on, and even further down. It's a bit like, and you said something like it's in the blood, or from what you do, maybe can like pass from the father to the son or something like that. And it's certain like imprints, I would say, or certain thought process also, or certain behaviors, or certain something like that.
Absolutely.
So it's not so much now a special event, but it's more the flavor of what I have with my parents, or when even up the ancestral line.
So have you ever had the experience where your phone rings, and of course, like nowadays we have cell phones that tells us who's calling, but in the olden days, right? The one hanging by the door, where you hear that ring, and it still happens with cell phones. You hear that ring, and
I know,
oh, that's so and so calling, right?
Yeah.
Now,
and I know it's my mother, or it's and I know,
there you go.
And sometimes it happens, and it's true, and with my wife it is, I know that, but it's not so much maybe the blood print, but it can be.
Let's talk on that one for a moment, okay? Because there are various ways that these prints can be formed, and what you bring up here is actually a very important point. With a partner that you're physical with, because you exchange those types of energies during sex, that also imprints them upon you, right? And so you could kind of say, be careful with whom you have sex with, or maybe a better way to put that is, don't have sex with someone you wouldn't want to be, right? Because you're going to exchange that type of energy with them. Yeah. When I was young, won't go into how young, but I had a girlfriend, and it was very interesting. I was sitting next to her. We were waiting, or I think I was seeing her off. She was waiting for a bus, and so we're sitting there on this bus park bench, and it's just quiet between us, just still, just quiet. And all of a sudden, I had this overwhelming urge to just look at her and say, yes. And she turned white as a ghost. She just like jaw drops, white as a ghost, right? And she's like, oh my God, get out of my head. You know, what she later shared with me was that she was mentally asking me, can you hear my thoughts? Now, that's not how it transmitted to me. What it transmitted to me as was just this sensation that I needed to answer her in the affirmative in this case, right? I didn't get the actual, can you hear my thoughts from her mind. But yeah, it does happen, right? And it doesn't happen necessarily from a blood relation. Pleiades and I last night shared a very interesting experience, or I should say sometime in the middle of the night. I do a certain type of work when I sleep, where I am basically in instruction by something. And I'm not going to go into by what, or what the nature is and all that type of stuff. But in I wouldn't even call it a dream, but for lack of better words, I will at this point. In my dream, the way it works for me is these entities will come and they will dump, right? Dump their content into me as I sleep. And then I process that as a dream. And so I was literally on this chalkboard here. I was literally on this chalkboard here and here, writing down everything that they were showing me and telling me. And there was all kinds of circles and symbols and diagrams going on. Yeah. Now this is obviously when I'm sleeping. So, I told Pleiades about it this morning, and she had this this jaw drop. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong camera here. She had this jaw drop, type of incident where she's like, I was there. I saw you writing on a chalkboard, and I saw all these strange symbols. I didn't tell her any of this.
I didn't see you, but I saw everything on the board. All these circles.
Okay.
This is weird.
Yeah. So can you guys hear her?
Yes.
She didn't see me, but she saw all these symbols right on the board and everything that I was doing. And not only did she see them, she actually was able to describe them, the nature of them, because I was getting a lesson on the nature of planetary and solar mechanics, for lack of a better word. And so she saw solar systems and planets and things orbiting and the ray of creation and everything else this morning. Now that happens. I mean, obviously her and I aren't related, so that happens because of that aspect as well. So I'm just trying to give you guys some hints and a bit of a wind in about how this clairvoyant aspect actually works. But now the real question is, how can you make it work for you? Well, I think the simplest answer is whatever you print in yourself, you can do. This ridiculous camera. Pardon me for a moment. Just going to point it straight ahead. It stopped following me. It's supposed to follow me. Whatever it is that you imprint in yourself, you become clairvoyant about. I gave you the example of martial arts, but let us say that you wish to become more clairvoyant about the natural laws or the planet herself, what she's feeling, what the nature of her expressions are, those types of things. Well, an easy way to do that is to begin to develop a pattern in yourself, a repetitional life in yourself, not of driving a car, right? Although you can become clairvoyant about driving your car, you really can. Most people are, they just don't realize it. But go out into nature and make it a habit. Start counting things. How many petals are on that plant? How many leaves are on that? Well, leaves on the tree might be there all day, right? But just start counting everything, because that is one of the actual natural expressions of the planet, is she produces things in numbers, doesn't she? You don't ever see a daisy with like 14 petals. They always come out the same, don't they? Now, what's going to happen at first, it's going to be a bit tedious, because you're just like 1, 2, 3, 4, everything. You just start counting absolutely everything. But at a certain point in time, once the moving center gets the hang of it and actually imprints the blood with that aspect of it, you can literally walk by anything and go, there's 14 of those, there's 87 of those, there's 293 of those, and you'll be dead on. You will be spot on. I'm not kidding. You will develop this kind of, it's not even, how do I put this? It's not even, it's not like what science thinks, where it's just your subconscious mind, you know, already has this ability and you've told your conscious mind that it's important to you and therefore ... From an esoteric, or actually a better word would be from an occult standpoint, what's happened is you printed your blood with this signal of numbers as they occur in nature and even not in nature, right? And you've developed this tuning fork connection with them so that when you see something and cast yourself towards it, you immediately get that clairvoyant, you know, I'm doing tuning forks here, you get that clairvoyant aspect and that brings that to you. Now, that's just one example. That's just with numbers. You can do this with colors. You can do this with anything that you want. But the point of this is to enhance this in yourself. You have to spend a little bit of time thinking about what it is that you want to print in yourself. Does that make sense? Everyone's nodding. Good, good. I'm going to pause here for questions for a moment, and then we'll go into some other ways. So we have printing, printing through repetition. Actually, we have two so far. We have the blood link, right? I don't recommend you go making blood brothers with anyone or drinking blood for that matter, but you know, our family, we have that sort of connection, don't we? We have anything that we put into ourselves via repetition is another aspect of it. Now I'll pause for any questions. Or comments. Okay, I'll move on then. Another aspect of it. So we have discussed some of the functions of blood. One of those functions is the transportation of oxygen, isn't it? Along with nutrients, right? To the various cells in the body. Air is an interesting thing because it's air, you know, how do I say this? I'm going to talk for a minute about just the air itself. But when I'm saying the air, I'm not referring to the 98% nitrogen, you know, 3% oxygen and all that type of stuff in there. What I'm talking about is what it holds and what it maintains. Air has this particular quality about it of being able to hold things. It holds content. It allows content to build and to grow and to develop. And if you've ever been in a situation, well, we'll take the negative side of this first. If you've ever walked into a room where two people have been, you know, bickering, arguing, fighting, and you walk in, you're like, hey, what's going on in here, right? You feel that sort of tension in the air. It's like we even have expressions. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. That's called an atmosphere. May not be a productive atmosphere or one that you want to be in, right? But we all have this experience, don't we? It was like, yeesh, God. I'll give you another story. When I was a kid, I was a strange kid. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, of all places, which is sort of known as the hippie mecca of the United States back in the 60s and 70s when I was a child. And there was this bookstore on Pearl Street Mall in Boulder. And this is before I ever really encountered this work, but I already had this sense about myself that I could pick a book. I was always interested in esoteric and occult subjects, you know, the creepy things, right? And I got this sense about myself that I could pick a book just based on how it felt. And I was usually right after a time. I had trained my blood to be able to go, that one's, you know, I need that. Whatever's in that, I need that. But so I developed this skill. And then I went back years later, and the bookstore was still there, but of course it had flopped ownership a couple times and had now become a what I had found out later, a meeting place for those that are into, I'm not going to mention any groups or names or whatever, but a meeting place for those that are into the dark aspects of the occult, or at least wish they were into the dark aspects of the occult. You know what I'm talking about, right? And I remember the feeling of walking in there because I had a connection to it, you know, from the age of 7, 8 years old, I was in there all the time. But I went back as an adult and I opened the door, I go down the stairs and I just felt ill, just physically ill. Yeah. Everything in me was like, God, get out of here. And so I had to leave. And you know, that's an example. That's another negative example, but there's also the positive example. People who have met, you know, figures like the Dalai Lama, for instance, feel this kind of just sense of peace, such an overwhelming just sense of like, you just feel very good. I have met the Dalai Lama. You do. You feel really good by him, not because of who he is, but because of what he is. And what's happening when he's breathing in, or when another, you know, quote unquote enlightened person, or however you want to put it, is breathing in the air around them and then exhaling again, they're giving off a content that the air actually holds. And if you walk into an environment like that, it can print you, especially if it's a very strong one. You know, when you get an area like this that's relatively enclosed, the atmosphere can literally just start to stack up. Yeah. And clairvoyance will switch on just like that with people. They will start very visually actually seeing what the other person is thinking, feeling what the other person is feeling, sensing what the other person's sensing. And that has to do with it being a conductive atmosphere. This happens, yeah, depending on what the person or what the group of people in a situation like that is actually processing. Probably during a completely different course, workshop, whatever, we'll go into how to generate. Here, I'm trying to do one. We'll go moving center, right? We'll go into how to actually generate certain types of atmosphere, certain types of environments, and that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm not careful. A white elemental will come descend. Yeah. So there's another way. So what do we have? We have blood brother, right? Our heredity gives us this kind of clairvoyant connection. Intercourse can give us a clairvoyant connection. Repetition amongst certain types of things. Actually, I'm going to take that back. It is literally whatever you repeat, you will become clairvoyant about. Yeah. I mean, to take a very bad example, even drug addicts will, you know, they'll be able to sniff that. You could drop a drug addict in a town that they have never been to before, and within an hour, they'll figure out where to, you know, score, as they say, right? It's that clairvoyant connection, and it has to do with the repetitional nature of it. Yeah. So, and then there's atmospheres. And that should tell you something too, because it's really, really good to be sensitive and be aware of what kind of atmospheres you're in. Now, I'll talk a bit more about that one because something else occurred to me, but we actually carry our own atmosphere with us. It's called the aura in human terms, right? And it can be quite large, but, you know, for example, here, standing next to her, we are exchanging an atmosphere right now. And as I move away from her, I take a bit of her with me and leave a bit of myself behind in that regard. The classic example is, you know, you're standing in line at the grocery store, minding your own business, ready to check out. And all of a sudden, you just get this like feeling that you just want to go home and kick your dog. Good, I gotta laugh. And you don't even have a dog. right? This is that transference of atmosphere from one to the other. And this actually goes into another law as well, that things always move from higher to lower, just like weather systems. Yeah, they move from higher to lower. And so if you are kind of charged up, which I hope you will be a bit after this today, if you're a bit charged up, then you go out and you're kind of like giving atmosphere to everyone that you encounter. But if you're low, then you are drawing from them. I bet you everybody here knows somebody that after they have spent just a little bit of time with, and it could be a family member, it could be a friend, whatever, coworker, colleague, whatever. After you've spent a little bit of time with them, you just go away feeling just drained. And maybe they didn't even say anything. It's not like they were unloading all their problems on you or whatever the case is, but it's that almost like energetic vampirism. That's your atmosphere leaving and going into theirs. You feel the loss. Actually registers like a loss, like a draining. This isn't scripted, by the way, okay? I just that little white sheet up there is just like a couple of bullet point notes. I just wanted to make sure that I stayed a bit on track, but in true form, I usually end up broadening out my track a bit. I'm going to pause again for any questions, and then we're going to go to this board a bit just to give you a kind of an overview of what clairvoyance is.
My question is all the examples you have just mentioned, is all of that clairvoyant, or is that also going into the other areas?
Which one in particular did you have a question about?
Let's say when you feel something, is that then more the empathic way,
Well,
or is
I see what you mean. It really
Yeah.
depends on which center is picking it up. It can be empathic, and we'll definitely cover sort of the difference. For it to be clairvoyant, it generally speaking happens in real time. Okay, so it's not a
okay?
it's not a past or future type of based event, whereas some of the other divinatory aspects can actually transcend time. Okay, so that's one clue. Just like picking up the telephone, it happens when as it's ringing, you're like, that's my mother, right? That sort of thing. There is a certain flavor and a certain nature to it, though. Another clue, excuse me one second. Another clue or aspect is if you're not dealing with something family related, it's have I put it there? Does that make sense? In other words, have I done the repetitional life of myself
Okay.
to make myself clairvoyant in that aspect? If not, then it's probably one of the other divinatory type of arts.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So let's just go over some of this stuff. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different categories listed here. The first one is body. Second one is activation. Third is symptoms. Fourth is timing. Fifth is preference. And sixth is expression. I'm saying this just in case you can't read my handwriting, although I slow down and really try. It's still not always great. So in the body, clairvoyance, we talked about the blood aspect of it, but the bone aspect also comes into play a little bit from the standpoint of where the red blood cells are manifest. You can have a clairvoyant aspect from the bones, and it really has to do more with the pressure and the crystalline structure. It releases the energy. That's something we didn't talk about. I need to talk about it. Please, someone here remind me before we go to talk about how to charge up your blood systems to make yourself more prone to clairvoyance. Okay, I'm not going to do it just yet. It also shows up in the nerves sometimes, and that's where you get that feeling, in the pit of your stomach, like my uncle is in danger or whatever the case may be, right? Sometimes it comes as a start to your systems, a shock, yeah, that sort of thing. And again, it's activation, and I sort of touched on this already. Vibrations would be a slower sort of thing where you just begin to kind of have this sense of it, have this feeling of it. It then moves, well, it can also be a form of shock, right? That sudden start that I just mentioned. And the third way, as far as activation goes, is emotion. Who here has ever had this event in your life where you just all of a sudden feel elated for no external reason that you can put your finger to, or you just start crying, you know, at the opposite end of things. Sometimes that can be a clairvoyant aspect. The problem with clairvoyance and all of the divinatory arts is that a lot of times it's a matter of translation. Okay. I'll give you this as an example. It's kind of a weird example because I just discovered it yesterday as I was setting up this environment, this room. I have a camera here, and of course I have a camera here where you're looking from. And the one here is on a tripod. And it took me about an hour to try and figure out, you know, where do I want this thing so for the best experience for you guys. Yeah. Having to do that many times, I would have to unscrew the camera from the tripod, right? It's got a little mount, a little peg that it screws into. I have to unscrew that and then go screw it back in again. And it's sort of, my faculties kind of twigged on the fact that as I was unscrewing the camera from the tripod, a certain number of loops would begin to form around the stand, around the pole, right? And of course, that's from the cord that's obviously having to respond to me unscrewing it. And so I decided to stop and count them. And when it finally popped off, it turned out to be 7. And so I 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 loops of this cord going around the pole, which of course is inconvenient because I have to undo it 7 times. But then something in me said, wait a minute, that's probably because it's screwing down 7 tiny little, I'm not sure what, you know, the screw, you know what I'm talking about? 7 threads, that's the right word. And so I counted the threads, and sure enough, where it stopped and the depth of the hole that the camera screws into, exactly 7 threads. Now, this is an example of translation when it comes to clairvoyance, because if I did not have that kind of wherewithal, I'm going to expand this out now for a moment, and I'm just looking at the cord tangled around the pole 7 times and don't have any idea of why that happened, it's going to be a mystery. I may make the observation, but I won't be able to link it up to the fact that there are 7 very tiny threads in the top of the microphone, in the top of the camera. Do you understand? And so sometimes you can be in a situation where you feel or sense something or observe something, but you're not able to trace it back to its origins. And this is what the whole 5 arts of the divinatory nature or divination are really about. It's about understanding the origin of these signals, or I'm sorry, understanding the nature of these signals, and then tracing them back to their origins. Where did they come from? Even if it was thousands of years ago, right? Or tens of thousands, or whatever the case may be. That's the crux of what the divinatory aspects are. And we have 5, oops, it's trying to follow me now. I did it. We have 5 aspects of that. Okay. All right. Where was I? Someone get me back into where I was at. We were here.
It had to do with symptoms, yes, activation and.
Yeah. So sometimes it can symptoms, right? Sometimes it can show up as an anxiety, the clairvoyant aspect. Sometimes it can show up as pain, actually. You know, there's plenty of examples of twins, especially, where one of them is, you know, far separated and gets injured in some particular way. And all of a sudden the other one's like, you know, they feel it. That's clairvoyance, 100% hands down. Urgency. It can just feel like you're antsy about something that's kind of like, anxiety, urgency, that sort of thing. Yeah. Okay. Timing with clairvoyance, it's always as it happens. Clairvoyance is not a future or past thing. That's something else. We'll get to it. We talked about the preference, family, associations, and partners. By partners, I mean your sexual partners. And then the expression that it takes on is responsive. It makes you want to do something, like the example of when I looked toward that young lady and just said, yes, it was just a response. I didn't think about it. I certainly didn't hear any words in her mind, in my mind. It just made me respond. It just happened that way. Right? Make sense? Okay. Visceral. That's the last one. Visceral. You feel it, usually, because it's tied into the moving center, which is the aspect. Okay. Switching back here now. Where are we with this? Any questions? Torsten, answer your general question. Yes, it can be any. Just depends on the nature of it.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Pierce, I just have a couple of questions, or not questions, really comments.
Yes.
I've really noticed quite a bit of this. I'm a Reiki master, and so I've noticed quite a bit of this in the energy sense, from the energy aspects of it, just feeling the energy level. And then Kim, my girlfriend, also, she's not a Reiki master or anything of that sort, but she's following Isha, which is the Indian or the Hindu. She's not Indian, she's Caucasian or American. But she's following the Hindu sort of, I don't know what to call it really. It's Mindfulness Foundation. That's whatever they call it. It's a cult or whatever. It's got a lot of names. And same thing there. It's we can feel it and we can kind of recognize it. And I'm starting to take that into, like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be with this person anymore. I don't want to go into this place anymore. This place has got some bad history. So before this, I was like just oblivious, and it's like I'm going there for something, and I just pick it up anyway and go. But now I'm starting to actually act on it and say, I'm going to give you a little bit of trust, maybe actually no trust, but more like awareness. It's like, this is not a good vibe. I should be careful. And usually it turns out that way. Yeah. Usually, like, you didn't have a good feeling about this, right? And just don't do it anymore. Like, just whatever it is, new car, new vehicle, new restaurant, new store, new person.
It's interesting, real quick. Hold on. It's interesting that they say, follow your gut, right? Because the home of the moving center is in your gut, and that's going to give you that sort of clairvoyant, feeling first. That's where it's going to enter. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. I was taking this trauma for yoga class where they were talking about, like, there's about, I forget how much it was. I think there's about the number of neurons that are in our what is called the vagus brain, which is the brain that kind of sits behind. It's basically not, so we've got a thinking brain, and then we've got a reptilian brain, and then we've got a third brain. They call it the third brain, the gut or the brain. The number of neurons in there it's like almost, I don't know if it's 30% or 50%.
Yeah.
Really large. The number of neurons that go in there is like, that's like a brain by itself, as much as
it is. Yeah.
So that's kind of where we feel it. And I didn't know any of this before. Like 6 months ago, you tell me, it's like, whatever, dude, I'm just gonna go bang my head because it doesn't have a right vibe. But the best thing to do here is walk. Like, just walk. It's not gonna work. Your brain is telling you something. Just don't do it. Walk. Yeah. And I'm kind of starting to act on that. Still not aggressively acting on it, but starting to act on that pretty consistently. Where if I'm not getting a good vibe, and I will still kind of be very careful, but I'll have my guard up. Like, I'll really have my guard up, and there will be very little benefit of doubt. If something starts going wrong there, I'm not going to give it a benefit of doubt. I'm going to say, I saw this. This is not a good vibe. Immediately cut. Basically, take my losses, get out, or whatever it is. Take my losses, get out, or stop whatever I'm doing, or file a lawsuit, or whatever it is that I have to do. To really just basically say, don't take a chance on this. This is not good. This is not good. It's not the right thing. Cut it. Yeah.
Well, you had started off by saying, that you're a Reiki master. Do you realize that the symbols, the symbols for Reiki, those are tuning forks all the way.
Yeah,
those are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all the five, the major ones, they're all I was looking at this. Like I
Yeah.
started doing it, and sometimes it worked and sometimes I didn't. Like I became a Reiki master a long time. It's like,
Well,
this-
what's going to work for you is what you have that repetitional connection to, though. See, the power of the symbols when it comes to Reiki, from the standpoint of what we're talking about here, is that a certain number of people have done a certain level of work in the astral light into those symbols.
Yeah.
So by visualizing or looking at those symbols, you can connect to that bank of force that they powered, right? And this symbol on the wall here, by the way,
Reiki.
is an extremely powered symbol. This is why I've put it up, okay, today, because I wanted this vibe in here today. Yeah, so if the symbol doesn't work, it's probably more because you haven't had the repetitional life with it to be able to connect to it, but you most certainly can. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And you'll probably feel as time goes on too, with your energy healing, that sensitivity becomes heightened, right? You'll walk by someone and be like, they have, XYZ, something going on with their stomach or whatever the case might be, right, Torsten? Something going on with your stomach. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember you. I remember the lesson. Very good. Right. So there's those aspects. Okay. Now, did you all forget to remind me before we wrap up here in about
Charging the blood.
Yes, charging the blood. Couple ways to do it. Now, what this does, first of all, let me give you a little lesson from history. And again, I'm going to go back to martial arts, mostly the Shaolin Temple, because this is where this type of practice predominated. But what they would do is they would put the disciples through the most excruciating, physical, really, really, really hard stuff, right? I mean, when I was young and just first starting off, they have this thing called the horse dance, where you're squatted down low, and this part of your leg here remains parallel to the ground, right? And you're kind of like in this stance here, and you would have to hold it, not just for minutes, but sometimes for hours. Now that sounds impossible. If you want to know how difficult that is, try it for like a minute. Back straight, down in that position. Try it for just a minute and you'll get an idea. But regardless, back in the ancient times of the Shaolin Temple, they would put their students through just the most amazing rigors. And then they'd say, okay, great, right? Once they're completely exhausted, and then they'd say, now meditate. Meditate and think about this or think about that. What that process does is it heats up the blood, okay? The physical aspect of it, it heats up the blood. It gets it pumping, it gets it moving. And just like iron that gets heated up, it becomes malleable. And then they drag them away and say, now sit down and meditate, quick, right? While you're still in that state. And think about this thing and think about that thing. And as the blood cools, it crystallizes certain features in them. And so the reason why I say the Shaolin Temple is because it was probably one of the last times on earth when a temple setting in China actually had that occult aspect to it, where it was 50% spiritual, 50% physical, right? And they did this sort of thing. So if you are the physical type and you like doing things like jogging, running, whatever the case may be, my recommendation to you is when you're working hard, set an intention mentally of being completely still inside while you're doing that sort of physical activity. In other words, if you're moving outside, don't think, don't emote, don't feel, just be open. And then after you're done, take a few minutes to actually do a meditation or a repetitional devotion, whatever you want to call it, of those qualities that you wish to bring into yourself. Yeah, of what you wish to be clairvoyant about. And as your blood cools down, it will lock into place. So there's one. For those of you that will be working into the electrobic stuff that I have, we'll definitely go over different types of ways to charge the blood. Okay, this type of movement in your own aura or in someone else's aura will charge the arterial systems. Okay, very similar to doing a workout if you know how to do it right. This kind of movement that can be substituted in some cases in place of a workout if you wish to achieve the same kind of result. Right, it's that charging of the blood, and then once it cools, you can do a cooling movement, which is this is a venal movement versus arterial. Once it cools, then do your devotions. Do what you wish to lock into yourself in that way. Okay, so there's another. And then the third, really quite simply, there's several locations on the body that are called blood ports. They're open, right, where energy flows in and out of the blood. And one of those is, I don't know if you can see here, right here. Okay, that's probably the most easily accessible, right here on the wrist, kind of where you would take a pulse. That's one of them. There's others, of course, but for a male man, take your right hand and just kind of point it like this, and just fire energy into it. Okay, fire energy into that blood port in there. Again, don't do your devotions or meditations while you're doing this. This is the charging. And then once you let go of that, then you put into yourself what it is that you want. Now, you can also do this to other people too, but that's not what we're here for, right? We're not trying to make other people clairvoyant, are we? We're just trying to enhance it in ourselves. But it does work, yeah, if you want someone to be connected to you. The equivalent, right, of becoming a blood brother to someone would be to do that, yeah, to get that kind of charging into somebody. Yeah. All right. Here we are bumping up against the hour. Any final comments? Was this useful?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Well, yes, that's it. And thank you all. And this will be a weekly thing, same time, same place. If you are registering online, please RSVP it. I actually take it down about an hour before the session starts and then put it back up again. For those of you that are members, don't worry about the registration. You've already got the links and stuff. So, okay. All right. Very good. Good morning, good evening, and good night, because you guys are all over the place. We'll see you later. Thank you.